Hello, my name's Cameron Jones and welcome back to my podcast. Today for our third, we're going to be stepping into two very spiritual films. Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life and Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal. You know, both these films wrestle with huge questions. Questions like, why do we suffer? Where's God in the middle of our pain? And, what does it mean to live meaningfully when nothing is guaranteed? To help unpack all this, I decided to be joined once again by our local pastor, James Jones. Thank you for being here.
Looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for having me.
So, let's begin with The Tree of Life. This film moves between the creation of the universe and the story of a family in Texas in the 1950s. Malick, in the beginning of the movie, he mixes galaxies, volcanoes, and oceans with childhood memories, griefs, and whispered prayers. The whole film feels like someone's trying to talk to God when God feels far away. One scene that really stands out in the beginning of the movie is its creation sequence. We're watching stars form, ocean waves crash, and then suddenly a newborn baby's hand. Malick uses this sequence to connect cosmic creation with personal creation, as if he's saying the creation of a single human life matters just as much as the creation of the universe. And then, there's this tension between the mother and father. The mother represents grace. She represents openness, forgiveness, and a sense of wonder. The father, however, represents nature. He represents survival, discipline, and the belief that the world is harsh and we need to toughen up. Pastor, my first question, in The Tree of Life, the mother seems to embody a spiritual sense of grace, while the father represents fear and control. How do you understand this tension from a religious perspective?
Well, that's a great question, and it's a question that is often asked. How do we resolve the concept of God either being this powerful, judgmental, domineering figure that brings judgment and penalty versus the grace-giving side that we see in Jesus? Oftentimes, the Old Testament is labeled as the harsh side of God, the judgmental side of God, the God that brings judgment and penalty to people. And then we often see the New Testament as, no, this is grace-giving and it's mercy-giving. And yet, if you look at the whole narrative together, it's all the same. In other words, God has both of those sides. If there's a God that created us, that put all things in order, it is a God of boundary. It is a God of structure. And he demands a certain amount of structure and obedience and all of those things. And when we go against that, my argument would be is that the harshness he brings, just like a parent sometimes needs to be harsh with a child, is actually necessary to keep them from further destruction. And then even though we see grace and mercy through Jesus Christ in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, it says that he is coming back and he will judge. And so this is not one of those either or. And I think the movie in particular, it shows both of those sides, and they're both necessary. You see a world with only tenderness and mercy and grace without penalty. You can imagine what can happen in a society where grotesque crime or harm towards others is not brought, no justice is brought towards. That becomes anarchy. And in fact, there can be no tenderness without there being guidelines and the rule of law and those different things. So to me, I think it's a beautiful description of the fact that it's man trying to figure out the fullness of God. And we tend to want to do it in one way. We want to say God is this way, when he's very, very multifaceted.
Thank you for that. The film keeps returning to the idea that every person's life, with all its pain, mistakes, and small joys, is kind of part of a larger story, even if we can't see the whole picture. The adult, towards the end of the movie, the adult Jack kind of wanders through a modern glass city, kind of looking lost. He's successful, but spiritually kind of disconnected. He's trying to make sense of his childhood, trying to answer a core existential question. Who did I become and why? My second question would be, when you look at an adult Jack wrestling with guilt, memory, and longing, how do you see that connecting to the spiritual journey people go through in your life?
Well, I think this is a perfect picture of the fact that we are in limbo, you might say. We are living through a world that is not how God designed it to be. We are people who long for the eternal, long for being near the Creator, and yet, because of separation due to sin, we are here trying to figure things out. And all of us go through life with mistakes and regrets and guilt. And, Jesus Christ in the New Testament came to free us from that, but that doesn't mean we have all of the answers. And I know for me personally, I've been in ministry about 30 years. And when I was young, in my early 20s, I thought that I was going to somehow get to a place, maybe at my age now, in my mid 50s, where I was going to figure a whole lot out, and I was going to have far less questions. And there's an old saying that the more you know you don't know. And that's really true for me. I've learned a lot. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to draw from and a lot of tools. But that doesn't mean that the mystery is vast. In fact, I think it gets even more vast. And I think this movie and those characters in that movie do a great job of kind of showing that we are in kind of a frustrating period of our existence where we don't have the resolve and the answers that we would love to have.
Now I kind of want to switch views here and look at our second movie, The Seventh Seal. This film follows a knight coming home from the Crusades to a world devastated by the plague. Right at the beginning, he actually meets death on a beach and challenges him to a chess match. This whole black and white cinematography, the shadows, the quiet, everything kind of creates the feeling that the knight is stuck between belief and despair. He wants God to answer him. He wants meaning. He wants a sign. But instead, he kind of meets silence. My third question would be, how do you interpret the knight's struggle with a silent God? In his view, how does this reflect the real experience of believers trying to hold on to faith in hard times?
In the New Testament, one of Jesus's recorded words go like this. It says, "Blessed are those who believe and who have not seen." And, it is a frustrating thing. I'll be the first one to get in line and say it is frustrating. I wish God would just show up, just walk beside me in the flesh, and let's have a conversation and take away some of this mystery. And so that is the case for the average person just seeking spiritual wisdom, to the person that doesn't know what to look for, all the way up to the theologian who has spent years and years and years pursuing truth, theological truth. And I'll be honest, I don't know exactly why. It's one of my questions I have when I be able to see Jesus face to face is why seemingly so much silence. But I will say this, that and whether it's, the Crusades, the plagues that hit the world, our world is very loud with conflict, with despair, with a lot of man-made things. And, there's another scripture in the Old Testament that says to be still and know that He is God. In fact, there's also another place in the Old Testament where it talks about that God did not speak in a loud voice, but rather spoke in a whisper, spoke in the wind. And so I think a lot of it is, for me personally, and what I encourage other people to do is, oftentimes it is not God that's being silent, it is us that's being too loud. And we have filled our world with so much loudness, so much trouble, self-made. And God says in His Word that if we seek Him with all of our heart, we will find Him. And that's really important to do. And so I think that this reflection in the movie is as true today as it might have been in that period of time that it represented.
But watching the movie, it isn't all darkness. There's a whole family of traveling performers, Joff, Mia, and their little baby. Their scenes are filled with sunlight and warmth. They live simply, lovingly, without needing any grand answers. But the knight keeps searching for meaning through big gestures. But the film, kind of gently suggests that meaning might be found in these smaller, kinder moments. Another question for you, Pastor, would be, how do you understand this contrast between the knight's heavy spiritual struggle and the family's simple, joyful way of living?
Man, that's a great question. And I think it's also, as I said earlier, something that the average person really deals with. I don't know about you or anybody else, but I know there have been many times where I look for God to move in the huge things, bring world peace or something like that. And so often I miss out on the small things. There's a verse in the book of John, chapter 1, verse 5, where it says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot comprehend it." And that verse signifies a couple things. First of all, there is darkness. There's a lot of darkness in the world, but there is a light that can shine into that darkness. And all you have to do to make a dark room light is to turn the light on. In fact, darkness is not a thing. Darkness is just the absence of light. And so often, we're trying so hard to solve the big world problems. And yet, really, for us as human beings, a small being, one of 8 billion on the planet currently, I can't be part of changing 8 billion people, but I can certainly do the thing that is right in front of me, embrace the day that's right in front of me. And really, I believe that that's what God calls us to do. There's an Old Testament passage in Ecclesiastes where it talks about basically just a good thing to do is just work with your hands and make the most of the day. And I think that spirit's really important.
Thank you for that. Talking about both films, when we place The Tree of Life and The Seventh Seal side by side, kind of a common theme emerges. Both films explore the tension between a God who feels distant to these characters and a world that still contains grace even in hard times. The Tree of Life kind of leans towards hope towards the end, and the Seventh Seal kind of leans towards honesty about a spiritual struggle. Another question for you, Pastor, would be, when you look at these two films together, what do they teach us about living inside the tension between faith and doubt?
Well, one of the things that is very unique and particular about my Christian worldview, based on the Judeo-Christian Savior of the world, Jesus Christ, is the fact that this world is broken for a reason. It's broken because we went against God's design. We decided that we knew better and we wanted to do it our way. And when that transpired, everything got messed up. And the entire story of redemption, from the earliest part of the Old Testament through to the book of Revelation, is God trying to bring us back into that broken relationship. And people often ask me, why is God putting up with this broken world so long? Why doesn't he just come back? And there's a very simple answer for that I've thought about for years, and I share it frequently. And that is that if we are created beings, created in the image of God. In fact, I'm about ready to see my first grandchild come into the world in the next week or two. And if that grandchild is made in the image of God, and he were to have come back last year, that grandchild would have never been born. That individual soul that he knit together in a perfect creation would have never been there. So I believe that God is waiting for all of the creation that he intends to be done, all of the individuals that he creates out of his loving spirit to have relationship with. He is waiting for them to be born in order to bring this broken world into completion. And, Jesus, after the cross went up, he said, I go to prepare a place for you. And I believe that Jesus is in that process of preparing a place. Meanwhile, we are here struggling and wrestling. I think that's why the New Testament tells us to work out our salvation with fear and trembling, not in the sense of working to earn it, but in wrestling with these very difficult things. And I know for me personally, I can only speak for me, but for me personally, the older I get and the more I do this, the more I just choose to trust that silence, trust that he's given me the information I need, but there's still a lot I don't know. The more I trust that, the more at peace I find myself to be in.
And kind of a follow-up question to that would be, both films show suffering right alongside beauty of life. How do you see this mixture reflected in your work with real people and real faith in your line of work?
Man, I see this play out every single day of my life, in ministry and in life as a whole. It is a mixed bag. We've got one circumstance at the church currently. We've got a young lady. She's a single mom, 2 young kids, and she's been through a lot. struggling with substance abuse, different things like that. And she's getting part of the fellowship. Her kids are loving it. It's all really good stuff. And yet she's got an ankle monitor. And she is still going through some of the consequences of her previous actions. And, her finances aren't in really great shape. And so, we constantly wrestle with both, often simultaneously. And we just have to trust as we go through those. I always tell people like her or others is to do the next beautiful thing. Seek the next beautiful thing. Endure the difficulties. Endure the difficulties. All through the book of Psalms, King David writes about God being his help, about God being his refuge, God being his covering, the cleft of the rock. Why did he use that term, cleft of the rock? Because when the hailstones are coming down, the cleft of the rock is what protects you. And the most famous psalm of all, Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. What does a shepherd do? A shepherd keeps sheep safe and alive in the midst of a world with wolves. And so in the midst of difficulty and trouble, God would call us through his son, Jesus Christ, to allow him to be the shepherd and to trust in him and wrestle with those things, but to continue trusting in him even when we don't have the answers.
Thank you so much for that. Both films show that faith isn't simple or easy. It's a conversation between doubt, beauty, memory, and hope. Malick gives us grace woven into everyday life, and Bergman kind of gives us honesty of questioning, even when God feels silent. Pastor, I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure.
The pleasure's mine. Thanks for having me.
And, thanks to all of you listening. This has been quite a amazing and kind of in-depth look at all these different films and what they kind of offer towards the existentialist view. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening.